Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another broadcast at UIC Liberty TV. My name is Winston Wright, and this evening we are speaking about national security. Yes, that very important topic that has every Jamaican who now feels insecure, looking and wondering what will change, what can change. And as usual, we're here to give you the UIC's perspective. With me this evening are a very young group, a group of panelists who are very concerned about security and want to find out what the UIC plans to do about their security to relieve them of their state of insecurity. And I'll start by introducing the person at the top of my screen. We have with us Nola M., then Mr. Jawan Watkins. We are also joined by Mr. Patrick White. We also have, we'll have Mr. Doheen C. Joining us later on. And these are young persons who have very serious questions to pose to the UIC to see if we have any idea of how to change the security framework in Jamaica. Now, whether justice to you means the proper administration of law to ensure that they are enforced fairly and equitably for all persons, or it just means the application of legal rules to resolve disputes between citizens or between citizens and the state, you have to admit that justice must appear to be done. And the UIC, like any other movement that aspire to lead this country, has definitive plans to improve the security architecture of the country. We are plagued with violent crimes that we are now known for regionally and globally. And we see increasing levels of administrative crimes, what they call white collar crimes, and it is mainly concentrated in a particular group. Jamaica went through a period of notoriety when one of our famed stalwart lost millions through one of those white collar crimes, and it brought the whole matter of these crimes to the forefront, whether it be cyber crimes or fraudulent activities through credit schemes or just outright going into your bank account through digital means. It is clear that there is a need to improve security in Jamaica, which will lead to improved production. It is noted that we're losing billions of dollars through white collar crimes, and our resources are taxed, especially our medical resources and our emergency services, through other physical acts of violence, such as shootings and stabbings, etc. Jamaica needs a paradigm shift, and the UIC believes that the two colonial parties, after 80 years of ramping up crime to this level, has lost their way. It is not in their best interest to solve the crime problem, to, as they would say, tame the crime monster, because they are known to have facilitated the escalation of crimes to this level. And now that the criminals have graduated to even bigger crimes, even more heinous crimes, they are struggling to keep up with it. UIC, who is not of this brood, has a definitive stance on criminality because we believe that we have to not fight crime, but solve crime. And in doing so, take a multi-pronged approach, which includes economic intervention, social intervention, legal intervention. And we are prepared to do so. And tonight, I'm here to discuss those plans with our panel. Now, this plan that UIC has been fermenting for many years. And we'll discuss these and start by taking questions from our panelists. And so I would like to open my mic to those persons who are so curious and ask. And I'm going to start with, again, the first person on my screen, which is Nola M., to ask her to deliver her first question to hear what the UIC has in store. Nola M., the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nola. Let me pull up my phone because my questions are on my phone. So give me just a second. Give me just a second. All right. So my first question to you, Mr. Wright, is under the UIC's government, how would you propose handling officer misconduct as well as lack of accountability for persons in position of power as it relates to high-ranking officials, as it relates to the police force?
Okay. So the high officials that the question speaks of are in the police force. That
Okay, so it's
general.
for lower ranking officers as well as high officials, because leadership starts at the top. If upper top management is not in order, then those at the bottom won't be in order as well. So my question is, how would you propose of handling officer misconduct for the lower ranking officials as well as for the higher ranking officials as well, who don't how would you hold them accountable?
Okay, great. So it's all about the police force. Thank you for that. Now, the force, as it exists, has a code of discipline. But that code of discipline, like all other laws of Jamaica, are poorly enforced, and that needs to change. As a matter of fact, the entire legal framework of Jamaica is porous because it facilitates the kind of activities that we see, not only officer misconduct, but also misconduct of high officials in the force and high officials outside of the force. So what do we need to do? We firstly need to fix that framework. And the UIC has indicated time and time again since its inception that we will begin with the Constitution. No, not the one that is currently being contemplated, but a genuine constitutional change which gives you a guarantee of certain rights. Those guarantees don't exist currently because you get them on one side and it's removed on the other. So we will guarantee those rights. Our constitution will tell the state what it can do for you and what it cannot do to you. So we'll start there. Now, with the officers in the force who are serving, when we have definitive laws that doesn't allow the loopholes of misconduct and allow for punitive measures, then we go back now and look at how they serve. So, for example, the JCF does not have a defined or has never publicized clearly a use of force policy. And we see, for example, in recent times, at least 3 incidents of uniformed persons who appear to be members of the force using physical violence on persons who they have already apprehended and having handcuffs waiting to be transported. Now, if you have a man shackled and beat him, you're opening him up to serious injury or death. And international norms that we are contractually obligated to follow by treaty that we have signed dictate how our officers should handle themselves. For example, right now, we have issues in sourcing ammunition from the United States because of those liabilities and the obligations that we have that our officers are accused of violating. And this is an issue that is not synonymous to the JLP. It goes as far back as a PNP administration. So the long and short of it is this: to curb misconduct, we need clearly defined rules, not only rules of engagement, but rules of behavior, clearly publicized use of force policy, and of course, a clear means of discipline with strong oversight. So I hope that answer suffices.
You did. Thank you. Thank you for that.
No problem. And so I'll now move to Jawan for his question.
Thank you very much for having me. So one of the questions I have for you is, do you think that Jamaica has sufficient resources to solve its national security issue?
Thank you for that question, Jawan. Whether or not Jamaica has enough resources to solve its national security issue. As it is anecdotally, it is yes, Jamaica does have enough resources to solve its national security problem. When you look and see that Jamaica is losing billions of dollars to corruption, political corruption, that money is out of the public coffers that can go to issues such as national security. When you also look at a recent audit that indicate that hundreds of millions of dollars are missing from a number of ministries, and there is no accounting for it. And in previous years, they are reporting out of the Auditor General's office that says that monies that should have been collected by the government from persons who were either overpaid, who either fraudulently took monies from the government and were ordered by the courts to repay it, that those monies weren't collected. Jamaica is not a poor country. We're a poorly run country. And if that changes, if there's fiscal discipline, not fiscal discipline where you say that the economy is growing, but your planning institute is saying that the economy is shrinking, your international partners and monitoring agencies saying that the economy is shrinking, but you're telling the people that the economy is growing. But on a daily basis, when the people go to the pumps for fuel or the supermarkets for food, you're seeing their buying power shrinking, diminishing. I'm talking about genuine, genuine accountability and fiscal discipline that will penalize those who dare take from the public coffers and claw back with interest and even the forfeiture of assets where necessary, where the laws apply to make sure that the state is reimbursed so that we can afford the things that we need, such as additional programs in national security. Does that suffice? Or do I need to clarify anything, Jawan?
That's a very good answer. No need for further clarification.
Thank you for that, Jawan. Let me now move to Brother Patrick. Your question for me, sir?
Yes, I do have a question. Just a second. Hold on here. I'm trying to get home. All right, sir. How are you?
I am good, Patrick.
All right, wonderful. My question is a very simple one. UIC has never had state power. They don't know anything about the ins and outs of running a government or running the country. What makes you believe that a UIC government would do a better job than those who are there running the national security apparatus right now?
Thank you. That's a very pointed question, Brother Patrick. And let's look at it this way. The current state organization, the current state layout, does not have any expert in any of the field. Our health minister is not a doctor of medicine. Our national security minister, is not a security professional, but a medical doctor. And I can go on and on. However, the permanent secretaries in those ministries do have some grounding in those fields. The UIC plan is to remove ministerial responsibility for these agencies, make a minister a true professional. So subject matter experts will run these ministries. So a national security ministry or agency would be run by a security expert, someone who is trained and qualified in administering security at the highest level. That is what you'll have from a UIC government. Now, what we have is a system that allows persons who are just figureheads, who will have their photos in a ministry's office, and who will rubber stamp policies, go in, and in their idle ways seek to enrich themselves while in public office, while the matters at hand of the nation lags, if not falter. The UIC will end that by making sure that qualified subject matter experts head the different ministries and are supported by qualified individuals. So that is our simple plan. So while we have not held state power, the apparatus as it exists, while it is flawed, it has shown a simple metric that the current ministry layout is bloated, inefficient, and wasteful, and only breeds corruption. So we will change that, put experts in charge to make sure that the work of the people gets done. I hope that suffices, Brother Patrick.
It did. Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Okay, hold on. This before you move on, Mr. Wright, I have a question as it pertains to what you just said, right? About using expert in their field to be ministers for for whatever field they are planning to serve. As it pertains to crime and violence in particularly, right? Say lawyers, you'd use lawyers for lawmaking. No, would these lawyers still be allowed to practice law? Because if they are, then that means they're not going to, a criminal lawyer is going to allow for a certain loophole because that's how they get paid. Would that not also lead for more, criminality?
I do get your point. And why we will not tell someone that they can't make a living, we will have safeguards against conflict of interest, nepotism, and any other form of cronyism that will lead to corruption or ineffectiveness. It is as simple as that. So if you are a lawyer and you're involved in governance, then just like other jurisdictions have done, you will willingly agree to end your private interest so as to pursue the public good and relieve the public of having to watch for a conflict of interest. I hope that was sufficient for you.
It was. Thank you.
All right, wonderful.
Fine.
So now, let me take the time to also, while we discuss policing a lot, this matter is about justice and national security. So, if we are to look further at how the country is run, we'll realize that justice in Jamaica continues to elude most persons. It's either systematically delayed or completely denied. And the famous case is that of our President Joseph L. Patterson, who, after being arrested in 2020, brought a constitutional challenge as part of his defense. And this constitutional challenge affects every Jamaican. So it is of highest importance. It is a precedent-setting matter, meaning whatever ruling that is handed down by the Supreme Court becomes the standard of law in the nation. So imagine how important that kind of a ruling is. When his case went to the Supreme Court, he was told that he cannot get a hearing until after 2 years. Imagine, 2 years. He has to wait for a hearing. And so it was. And all this time, he had to incur the financial burden of going to 2 separate court appearances, each time like clockwork. Finally come time for him to have his hearing. 2 days was set aside for arguments. Only 1 day was used because the 3 presiding judges were of the opinion that the legal team for our president had put forward a strong argument, and that since the rebuttal from the government side was limited, that amount of time is needed. So arguments were presented and arguments were closed. They now promised to deliver a judgment in the matter within 3 weeks. So after 2 years, he now needs to wait 3 weeks for a ruling in a most important matter, a matter of national interest. It is now a year plus since that promise, and he has not gotten that ruling. What does that mean? He still needs to go to court. So for almost 4 years, he has been going to court, which means he has incurred legal costs and other costs, including the cost of having to close his business during those periods, which is considered a hardship on anyone. It is considered unjust to anyone. But yet, he has to go through this. And to this day, he has not had his ruling. But the leader of this country has been accused of serious impropriety in public office. He was able to get an expedited hearing within less than 90 days. His matter isn't precedent setting. His matter doesn't affect every Jamaican, but it does affect his leadership. And it is important that we know what our leader is standing for, or what our leader has stand accused of. So I agree that he should have his day in court and expeditiously. He also, after having his day in court, got his ruling within 3 weeks, if my memory serves me correct. That hearing cleared the way for him to go back to the courts to further expand his case. And guess what the courts did? They said, we know that an election is pending. And because we don't want this to be an issue in the election, we will go ahead and set the trial date for after the election. So hear me. If the man that you're supposed to vote for is accused of serious corruption, when you hear about 28 bank accounts and hundreds of billions of dollars, etc., allegedly, you'll want to know that you're voting for someone. You're investing your trust in someone that puts your country first. Because it means, the accusation means that during the pandemic, when he was supposed to be protecting your life and livelihood, he was busy building his wealth, allegedly, through inappropriate means. But because the courts don't want you to consider that as part of the man's character and voting for him, they're going to wait until after you vote. But Joseph L. Patterson, who has brought a point of justice on your behalf to the courts, is going to have to wait 4 instead of 5 years. And guess what that does for them? It means that if he were to win the election, they can say, hold on, we're not seeing things your way, so we're ruling against you. So you no need to go to court and plead guilty, pay a fine, or suffer imprisonment, which disqualifies him from holding a seat. Yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, justice in Jamaica is not straightforward because it is a gift from the colonial masters that they had used throughout the decades to extract our wealth. They then handed it to the neo-colonialists who have sat in our House of Representatives for 8 years, who are now using it to do the same. Their talk of constitutional change is rubbish. Why would they kill their cash cow that allow them and their friends? Look at how many of their friends have been accused of serious corruption, including those that the current Prime Minister brought into politics, ushered into various roles, and they have not faced the music for any alleged wrongdoings. Or do you think they will kill that cash cow after 80 years of enriching themselves and their families and their connected friends? No. So rest assured, this is another trick. But UIC is quite clear, quite adamant that the system has to change and will change under UIC government, where justice will be a network of policing specialists, legal practitioners, jurists, administrators, and rehabilitationists, so that way the ordinary person isn't failed. Our system is deeply colonial and designed to manipulate us. The elites will get away with anything that they can. Our courts are too intertwined with the leadership of the country. Our policing hierarchy the same. And that is why the office of the Commissioner of Police need to be depoliticized. They need to have independent but biting oversight from a civilian authority. And by the way, they will tell you that there's a police civilian oversight authority. In the media, it's criticized as being ineffective. Their last annual report was sometime in 2012, I think? 2012? Yes. In 2012. And their scope of work is so limited that it's not funny. Their job is only to audit and inspect policies and procedures that the police force put in place. Now, of course, we have other agencies that are vested with other oversight that are just as limited in their role and therefore unable to perform. And we are left to the whim and fancy of a system that is broken deliberately. And if we're not connected, then we will get no justice. Now, let me go back and let me welcome those of who are joining. It's good to see you on. This recording will be on our YouTube channel. I would have hoped to have it go live, but that isn't the case today. So I'm talking with my panelists, a group of young persons who are curious about what the UIC will do in terms of national security, justice, and even defense. So I go back to Nola for her question.
I just thought of this question while you were talking. What would under UIC's government, right? Because what do you propose we do with the proceeds from crime? So, example, the government will take millions from criminals and then say they have it in holding, but yet when there's an emergency or something happens, these funds magically disappear in the sky. Like, what do you propose under the UIC's government we do with proceedings from crime?
That's a good question, Nola. Thank you for that. Now, under certain laws, what they call forfeiture proceedings are held against anyone that is convicted of certain type of crimes, such as fraud, drug trafficking, money laundering, human trafficking, etc. And what we have heard, especially in recent times, is a lot of those proceedings against those types of criminals. But the fraudsters, who are the white-collar criminals who are connected and in high places, we never hear of them going to trial or any forfeiture proceedings against them. Now, forfeiture proceedings are a good thing. It means that you'll be able to take the ill-gotten wealth of persons who are convicted, not convicted, of those types of criminality and use it for a social good. What we have now is the government, and if you carefully look throughout Jamaica, the government, not only this government, but previous governments have been quietly creating a lot of statutory agencies. What that means is this: agencies that are usually organs of the state, whether it be, for argument's sake, just picking one, the Transport Authority. they have been made statutory bodies, which means they now have responsibility to hire, maintain, compensate staff. They now have the right to create their own budget. All right? And while they get a subsistence from the government coffers, they have to raise the majority of that budgeted funds through the service that they provide. And that is why every year, like clockwork, the fees at the Transport Authority goes up. And many of these agents of the state or agencies of the state are now being turned into statutory body to raise their own funds because the government realized that that is an easy way to pick money out of the pockets of the people and allow these agencies to engorge themselves, become cash rich like the NHT, while providing poor service. Okay? So these agencies now, so for example, when the SSL debacle came about and the FID, Financial Investigation Division, was asked, right? And the Financial Services Commission to make sure proper investigation was had. And we found out that certain things were taking place, including the government being asked to continue to foot certain bills at that agency, at that business, while these agencies investigate. And when the public outcry got loud, the government said, no, we were just doing it to preserve evidence. But since you said that won't work, all right, the Financial Services Commission, being a statutory body, will use its money to do it. And the people said, no, that's still not going to work. The Financial Services Commission now said, hey, we're a statutory body and we have certain confiscated funds, so we'll use that. So that's how these monies are spent by the different agencies that confiscate it, or at least a portion of it. So they have that as part of their allocation to use. That needs to end. That money needs to go into a consolidated fund for the National Treasury, where it is used properly to provide actual services to the people, especially those who are victims of the criminality that led to the forfeiture. So I hope that answers suffice, Nola.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Wonderful. I'll go to Patrick for his next question. I think I bored Patrick to sleep this time.
Yes, sorry about that. My device is giving me a little problem. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine, Patrick. I'll take your next question when you're ready.
Yeah, man. One of the things that I have been thinking about in recent times has been Indicom and the way in which it was created, or the case in which it was created. And what we're seeing at this present time is that Indicom no longer has any proof or any key in terms of reining in police brutality and also extrajudicial killing. How would UIC go about making Indicom more independent, and also not just independent, but set the necessary frameworks in place to safeguard against malicious prosecution of the police? Because we're not saying that, hey, put this power in place to govern the police heavy-handedly, but also how to make it so that they can't do it in such a way. To be fair, is what I'm.
And let's start with malicious prosecution before we get to the Indicom powers part. Regardless of the state agency that brings charges or prefer charges against someone, the redress is usually a civil redress. So if Indicom maliciously prosecutes a police officer and that is his defense and is proven, he now has a case, a civil case against Indicom, because Indicom would now be an entity that can be sued and sued, right? Which means they would have acted under qualified immunity as an agent of the government, and if that qualified immunity doesn't exist, they, by extension, the government, by extension, us as taxpayers, become liable. And I want to point out that that is a serious matter in Jamaica, and one that the UIC has spoken about multiple times, where state agencies act outside of qualified immunity with no regard for the right of citizens. And the famous one is police will stop you on the road and tell you that, oh, we can search your car because I don't like you, you're ugly. Right? Forgive the crass expression. But that is not the case. As a matter of fact, it outside of the laws that says that, and the Constitution, that says that a police officer must firstly articulate reasonable suspicion that you have committed or about to commit a crime before they can use their power to search, because the Constitution guarantees you protection from arbitrary search and seizure. Okay? Now, a police officer can ignore that and go ahead and search your vehicle. All right? As long as you, one, register your protest with the officer that you have not given consent to that search, and two, make a complaint and follow up with civil proceedings, then the courts will decide. Because guess what? The Supreme Court, yes, the Supreme Court handed down a judgment that Justice Batts handed down this judgment in a case, Hemans versus the state, that indicate clearly that arbitrary searches, the stop on road and search a vehicle, should not happen. It was sent, the justice made an order to have the judgment sent to then Commissioner Ellington, who clearly, and I remember the day like it was yesterday, said that he will not stop because these actions have contributed to a certain number of interdictions. He had stopped certain amount of bad men breaking the law. And I was so disappointed because that then commissioner was one of the persons in the force that I looked up to. And being an officer of the court, because his position makes him an officer of the court, decided that he's not going to follow a judgment from the Supreme Court. And to this day, he or the force has not been taken to task. Well, there's one person doing so now. That is why that continues. But I digress. As it now pertains to the power of INDICOM. INDICOM, and before I go to INDICOM, in 2019-2020, $287 million was awarded to persons who their constitutional rights were violated in one way or another by the state. 40 million of that went to one individual. And that is just 1 year. There's a very storied history of this happening, a very long, lengthy history of it happening. And guess what? The courts have failed to stop it, and the powers that be have failed to address it. So yes, that is where we are right now, as it pertains to that matter. Okay. Sorry about that, I was having some technical difficulties. So the courts have failed to address it. So that situation has continued. So this liability bill, we continue to rack up these kind of bills from actions by our state actors. Now, INDICOM went on the streets to do its work, and I preferred charges against several police officers, and even some were convicted. And then the Police Federation said, no, sir, INDICOM can't lock up no policeman. So they took it to the Privy Council. And in taking a challenge to the powers of INDICOM to the Privy Council ruled in the Police Federation's favor, which means that INDICOM as an organization could not arrest or prefer charges against anyone. They would now need to go to the office of the DPP. And we all know the powers of the office of the DPP, and also how heavily influenced. And it is very apparent to persons from what has happened with several matters relating to not only police but high-profile politicians, including the return to office for a brief stint of a DPP who is way past her age of retirement. Yes, I'll say no more than that. So INDICOM lost its powers of arrest, so the DPP would now prefer charges on behalf of INDICOM unless an officer of INDICOM under common law, as a citizen of this country, would execute a citizen's arrest. But that isn't recommended. Now, shortly after this happened in 2020, because the ruling was handed down in 2020, the now Minister of Justice had a choice, and pundits speculated about it for many weeks, and he went to Parliament and he addressed the INDICOM matter and the ruling, against Indicom by the Privy Council. And instead of doing the just thing, the right thing, and amend the legislation to give Indicom the powers of arrest, he refused. Then and there on the floor of the House of Representatives. And therefore, Indicom is now left only as an investigative body that can only recommend arrests and charges, and the DPP will have to follow through. And we know the history of the DPP in not following through with charges against police officers. And from that day until now, police excesses have been reported. Our allegations of police excesses have been reported and have continued to balloon throughout various periods. We can see the figures, and I'll find the figures and present them, but I have presented them before. So persons who have heard that recording, it was an interview on Love 101, can go back to that. So that is the story with Indicom. The UIC will ensure that there is proper civilian oversight, also proper investigative mechanisms to investigate police excesses. And the modern policing practice is not to have police investigate police. Because, for example, the internal affairs arm of the constabulary force or the police inspectorate, they are part of the force. And the thinking is that interference can take place. While we have not had any deliberate evidence of that, the slow pace of investigations, the protracted investigations, and the lack of clarity in their ruling has led persons to understand that in other jurisdictions where independent oversight bodies are set up and so created to give powers to properly manage these cases, the need exists in Jamaica. And the need has gone short because politicians that we have, the current career politicians, are only interested in doing what is expedient for them and their careers. Most of them are lawyers anyway. So I hope that answered your question, Patrick.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Jawan, do you have a question for me?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead, please.
This question is, with the growing popularity of AI, what does the UIC plan to do to increase cybersecurity?
Thank you for that. I met a young man several years ago who was a member of the JCF and part of their cybercrime task force. And we spoke at length about his policing practice, or I should say the force's policing practice. And I know that the JCF has, in recent times, bolstered its cybercrime detection mechanisms. Now, with a powerful tool such as artificial intelligence, especially with persons not only in Jamaica and persons who are operating at a higher level, such as state-sponsored levels, our infrastructure remains critically vulnerable, including our banking infrastructures. And I hear horror stories of how that is playing out. It is hearsay, so I can't get into it here. To bolster our cyber security mechanism, we will need to invest heavily in countermeasures. We will also need to change the national consensus as to how we operate in a digital age and in a cyberspace. How do we change that consensus? Jamaicans aren't conscious or well schooled on the importance of things like password authentication, password change, password characteristics, and all that. Those are basic tools that will need to change at an educational level. And this is where the UIC plan for education comes to fore. I'll leave that for a spokesperson on education. But that basic investment in knowledge will add the first layer. The second one is to so equip our investigators so with the proper countermeasures that exist in other more technologically savvy states to make sure we can protect those critical infrastructure and provide proper security, cyber security to our Jamaican citizens. So it's an investment that is required not only in machinery and software, but also in the human capacity, both the national capacity and our specialist capacity. And the UIC will do so. I hope that answers your question, Jawan.
It does. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right. Nolan, you have another question for me?
I do. All right. So, and my next question again goes to is about the JCF, right? What is the UIC's plans to curb crime to boost economic development?
All right. And thank you for saying your question is about the JCF again. And I know a lot of the questions, because the biggest concern for most persons is internal security.
Mm-hmm.
But UIC thinks on a broader plane. National security for us is to look at how the government will use social and legal policing tools, how we will employ these to identify criminals and criminality, corruptions at our level, investigate these alleged crimes, and use technical expertise to resolve them. Okay? So nationally, we will look at all the things that are criminal, anti-society, and investigate them with powerful tools. So for example, murders are up in Jamaica, and there's very little that the two colonial parties seem to be able to do, simply because they are part of bringing the gangs, the guns, and the guns to the fore in the 70s and 80s. And they allowed drug running to foster with our porous borders and other transnational crimes. The UIC will make sure that we beef up our national security infrastructure at all of the designated points to counter these threats. In terms of defense, we are not on a war footing, but the UIC will make sure that our defense system is retooled and redeployed in some instance, helping us with surveillance and intelligence gathering at the higher levels, and then fortifying our borders, our physical borders, and protecting our exclusive economic zone to make sure that the kind of smuggling, whether drug, human trafficking, or other contraband that affects us and breeds criminality is stamped out before they get into Jamaican waters, before they get ashore, because guns aren't made in Jamaica. You follow? And of course, as it pertains to the police force, we will revamp the police force and firstly, give Jamaican a police service. And when persons hear that and think, hey, but they're not criminal and they're not big gun and any of this, there are several ways that UIC plans to do this. I won't get into the specifics, but I'll give basic examples. So for example, right now we have police officers in very, very comfortable administrative roles. The UIC firmly believes that anyone that has formal police training should be participating in active policing. So a station guard should not be an active duty police officer, but rather a civilian contractor that is properly vetted and placed in that role. We should move away from the days of a paper diary to a computerized system that creates and logs report, deploy them for review and sign off, that is accessible to an officer sitting in his patrol car, or an officer walking the beat, or a commissioner sitting in his office, all at the same time, just from the push of a button, and so on. So those are the kind of changes that UIC will make. The biggest one that the UIC is extremely anxious to push is community policing. We believe that an investment in community policing that will affect the social fabric of a community will bring a great change in one, deterring criminality, two, identifying criminals, and three, investigating and prosecuting those acts of criminality. Now, you asked about the JCF dollar, and I lost track of the questions. I'm going to ask you to repeat.
All right, give me just a second.
Nola, if you could allow me to take for a small question. To follow up on what Winston was saying about police, the digital connections that they would want to make.
Go ahead, Patrick, and you can raise your question right after Nola.
I don't know if any of you here have ever had any experience with the 119 emergency service. One of the things that I have come to time and time again whenever I call that number is that rather than connect you to a police station, what they do is that they're giving you the number of a police station, the nearest police station that you should call, or they're giving you the cell phone number of someone. Is it the cell phone or the cell phone number of the station in question? I don't know if that has changed. How would the UIC go about fixing that? Because I am thinking that in an emergency situation, you call 119, you're expecting to either be connected to fire, medical personnel, or police assistance. How would you go about changing this or connecting it so that when someone actually dials the emergency service, they actually get someone from the emergency service who they can see to who can then dispatch someone to their location for assistance?
All right. Thank you for that question, Patrick. And let me preface that by saying, as a former member of an emergency service, I understand the importance of taking that first call, getting the information correct or as correctly as possible, and making the right decision as to which assets to deploy and to where. On many occasions, I have called that emergency number, and the same thing has happened. And whenever I call the emergency line, I usually say, I am so-and-so, I am at this location calling. The nearest police station to me is in this area, and I am requesting this type of assistance. And it has never worked in getting me the assistance that I need. Never. But I continue to do that. Now, here's what UIC will do. In digitizing the force, and we're not only talking records, and I'm sure we all saw the article from about 2 years ago, where the records office has boxes of records still piled on the floor despite them saying they're digitizing the criminal records process. But in digitizing the force, what we will employ is a management suite or a crisis management suite of software that will allow a joint command setup where we will have for each parish a localized operator. And when you call the number, you'll go to the main command. And from main command, you go to the parish that you're in. No further. So if I'm in, for argument's sake, St. James, and I dial the emergency number, it will be picked up at the main emergency headquarters. And when I say I'm so-and-so and I'm in Westmoreland, or if I don't say it, then I'm like, oh my God, I need help. I say, which parish are you in? And immediately, you get sent to that parish switchboard. And from there, that person has access to maps, group calls to the different emergency services, and so on. So that person can now manage your situation to a successful rescue or resolution. I hope that answers your question, Patrick. So it's all about the software.
All right, thank you very much for that.
All right, back to you, Nola.
My question was, what is the UIC's plans to curb crime to boost economic development?
All right, broad question. I love that question. So economic development. Crime is a big deterrent, and the president spoke about it in a radio interview recently. Crime is a big deterrent to capital, and capital is what you need to start businesses. What we have had throughout the years is a trickle-down economic system, where the big businesses stay big, and hopefully you get a contract or a work. You understand? And most of these big businesses are aligned to politicians. They're the ones who fund the party and the party's effort to stay in office. You hear the UIC call them the PSOJ oligarchs. Other people call them rich man, big wig, big man. In the days past, they did backramasa, they did slave owner. Okay? Jamaica doesn't have a good history of creating new businesses because our capital is locked up. Okay? Now, we want to change that climate. And the first thing to do to change that climate is to remove the insecurity that is involved in investing capital. Now, a person is afraid to invest their capital because of fraudsters. A person is afraid to invest their capital because work output is low or poor. A person is afraid to invest their capital because the extortionists will come and siphon off their profits. When that changes, then business boom. And here's how it will change. We will create a strong investigative body that is independent of the politician, that has civilian oversight, and that reports to the judiciary. That independent investigative body will be like the Jamaican version of the FBI, jurisdiction all over, able to investigate any crime from anyone, regardless of how big you think you are or how small you actually are. That independent investigative body will set out to do its work. And one of the major focus will be bringing down corruption until it's eliminated. Then our officers who are courageous and on the front line on a daily basis, whether they're controlling traffic or they're chasing the bad men, they will be out there securing our streets, securing our public spaces, and making sure that citizens going about commerce or casual business have the freedom to do so and free from intimidation and the threat of crime. We will go further and make sure that there are specialized units that are able to project force, who are able to be the tip of the spear, to be that lethal arm, but their actions are guided by strong principles. In other words, a clearly defined rule of engagement and use of force policy. So you know that these guys are here to protect, but they are willing to go to the extreme to do so, and here is why and when they'll do so. Because they'll respect your life. That strong oversight will include, for example, again, the UIC had to comment on the need for body-worn cameras, which we support. It will be proliferated at all levels of the force. So that way, again, it becomes a teaching, learning tool, as well as a tool to protect the officer from accusations, especially false accusation, and a means to protect the citizens from police excesses. Everybody wins. There are other pieces of technology that we plan to deploy that are high-tech, but exist in the market in other developed states. For example, there's a thing called a sonic mic that can tell you where a gunshot was fired, the general direction that is, the gunshot was fired. And you leverage that with other technology to pinpoint exactly where it happened and even who. I won't say no more. Those are the kind of technologies that we will bring to our policing unit. So you don't have officers with adrenaline running because of fear. Because fear is a real thing, and it doesn't matter how brave you are or how well trained you are. Your training is to overcome your initial innate response to be fearful. So they won't act on that adrenaline rush, that passion, and inadvertently hurt or unintentionally hurt the alleged perpetrator or a bystander. So we're looking to elevate our policing to a never seen level, because we are not of the group that created the kind of criminality that is tearing the country down. We don't have any vested interest or friends in keeping any community down or any community shutter off the street. Once you have been proven to be involved in criminality, you will be penalized. I hope that answers your question. It sounds like you have a follow-up, Nola.
Yeah, I do. I'm sorry. All right, so
And
my
that's fine.
follow-up to that would be then, considering our long history of mistrust in the JCF, how would you then inspire trust in current business owners and future business owners to say, hey, they can come to the police to report theft and what is that, extortion? How would you inspire trust to say, if they come to us and we will properly investigate, and then this won't get back to the dons, that hey, this person's extorting me or whatever. Yeah, whatever.
So there are two policing models that the UIC and I look to. The UK model, but more so the Singapore model. The Singapore model is a zero tolerance approach to anything that is criminal. Any activity, regardless of how small that crime is a zero tolerance approach towards investigating and preferring charges. Okay? The UK model uses a multi-layer approach where they start with the community policing, then strong policing action, then direct policing action. And that is backed up by strong investigation. We will change the human element firstly. And that's why we say we'll create a police service. As part of that creation of a police service, we will need to upskill our police officers to understand certain operations. A police officer won't be a low-paid civil servant anymore, but will be a respected member of society that is compensated to the point where he and his family can live respectably and not be, for want of a better term, tempted by what he sees on the street. We'll also look at changing the training model of the JCF to make sure that continued and in-service training is a strong part of that and creates a better officer. So for example, the force currently gives you the law course over a couple of weeks. When I had applied to join the JCF at the age of 18, the law course, as was told to me, was 1 month. Even that was too short. So what the UIC will do is make sure that there's continuing development of especially the frontline officers as it pertains to the legal framework that exists in the country. So they understand how to use it. We'll also create some sort of wiki for quick research or quick lookup to make sure that officers have that information at their fingertip to use. So when you look at the overall development that will bring about a police service, the police actions will reflect that, and it will create a new outlook for those who interface with them. So you won't have an officer that is a poor communicator, that is belligerent and if not intimidating, is not threatening and borderline violent, but they would have been analyzed to understand these tendencies and if necessary rejected, because the force can now afford to attract greater talent because of the training, the compensation, and the respect factor. I hope that helps in answering your question.
It did, thank you.
Wonderful. John, over to you.
Thank you. So my next question is, with Jamaica being located directly between the USA and Colombia, what actions would the UIC implement to stop the trafficking of narcotics through Jamaica as a whole?
Thank you. That's a good question. Our president has spoken to this one on several occasions. He has indicated that for Jamaica to be successful in stamping out this kind of transnational crime, we have to harden our borders. As an island, there are so many beaches and inlets and atoll that these kind of activities can and have taken place. We have even gone to the point where we're seeing planes crash land, the cargo goes missing, the crew goes missing. You find the fuselage, you know contraband was there, but there is no contraband and no crew. So we need to invest in fixing that problem. And I mentioned earlier when I talked about defense, about creating a hard border by putting our security forces or defense forces to focus on that and extending that protection out into our exclusive economic zone, which is waterline extending some 20 miles out from our shoreline. If we reinforce those points, those transnational smuggling activities will end, but it will require resources such as boats, helicopters, drones. And when I say boat, I mean Coast Guard interceptor type of boats. These hardened vessels designed for shore protection. And as I said, helicopters and drones. This kind of investment in our security forces will not only create jobs. And when I say jobs, I don't mean menial jobs, but high-end technical jobs. But it will also boost Jamaica's economy, because now that the deleterious criminal element would have been missing, would have been put out of business, driven out of Jamaica. And we as a people will be able to enjoy the social benefits of that. I hope that answer was enough for you, Jawan.
Very good answer.
Thank you very much.
All right.
All right.
I would like to ask another question.
Yes, Patrick.
We have been sitting here and we have been talking about the national security apparatus. But one of the things that I realized that none of us has touched on is the reform system in Jamaica in terms of the prison system.
Right.
One of the things that I have noticed for the years is that a man is sentenced for a non-violent offense. Let's say simple act. A crime in and of itself, but simple act. How would you go about setting up a system that truly reforms that person rather than, what's the word I'm looking for? Making them worse. Let's approach making them worse. Because how can we justify housing a non-violent offender with violent offenders? How would the UIC balance that? What would the UIC do to prevent such things from happening? Because as you know, interactions do tend to influence people, right? So a man who does when this, that's why him going and fetching shop and him people with it. And after which he was sentenced to, let's say, a 6-month sentence. But he's doing it at a maximum security facility or somewhere where there is violent, truly violent offenders, murderers, rapists, gang members, and so on. How would the UIC deal with it?
All right, great question, Patrick. Now, when we talk about reforming the force, reforming the force includes the correctional services. And here's how we plan to deal with it. We currently have different levels of incarceration. You hear them talk about detention, minimum security, maximum security. We intend to firstly remove the responsibility for keeping anyone in custody from the police. Meaning when you're arrested and after you have been processed at a station, you should no longer be held in a lockup, but rather the correctional service will take responsibility for your care and be able to go through all the processes, include transporting you to and from your hearing if you remain in custody for a period. So reformation starts with ensuring that there is that differentiation in the level of incarceration as well as the agency responsible, because we want to keep police officers fighting crimes on the street and our correction officers caring for those that are incarcerated. Now, in the different levels of lockup, you will have different things happening. You will have those persons who are considered low risk doing certain things such as upskilling, educating, or performing work. As a matter of fact, all persons held at the pleasure of the state will be given a job. Yes, given a job. Doing things for the state, such as cleaning the highways, painting public institutions, cleaning public institutions, including schools, hospitals, etc., and paid for it. That money is held until they're released. And when they are released, they will have those sums to start over, including educational opportunities and so on. So you won't have the current system where there are men incarcerated or women, and you're living a lavish lifestyle, keeping parties at the pleasure of the state, while we struggle to pay taxes to keep them for whatever crimes they have committed. So the answer to your question, we will make sure that the differentiation in the levels of incarceration is streamlined and fully incorporated in our system. We will ensure that there's only one agency, which is the Department of Corrections, responsible for holding persons outside of a particular range, so that way we free the police up from those responsibilities and truly engage with the Department of Corrections and build out and maintain a rehabilitation program which opens up opportunities for upskilling, education, and work for those who are held at the pleasure of the state. I hope that answer will suffice.
It was. Thank you very much for that.
Wonderful. All right, so we're at that time where we should almost wrap up. And I thank you guys for being here and asking those questions. But I'll give each of you an opportunity to ask one final question, if you have any more left. And I'll start with Jawan.
Yes, sir. What I think is the question of all. What do you think is the greatest national security risk to Jamaica right now?
You know, a lot of people will say that gun crime or the gunman is the biggest threat to national security. And you have those people who will say malpractice in the policing arena is the biggest threat. But I'll say for the UIC, the biggest threat to national security is corruption. It robs us of education. It robs us of economic opportunity and economic means. It has throughout the years fostered hardened criminality from drug running to gun running to gunmanship to gunmanship to garrisonship and all the other ills that we can think of. And if we as a people manage to break the back of corruption, political corruption, high-level corruption, then the fraudsters that are connected to them, the bad men that are connected to them, the drug dons that are connected to them, and the garrisons that are connected to them will change for the better. So that is the biggest threat the UIC sees to national security. So that's my answer for you, Jawad.
Thank you very much.
All right, Nola, your final question?
Actually, my final question was the question he asked about the biggest threat to security. So, and you answered that. So thank you. Well, okay, I do have a question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Corruption plays a major part in crime. What amount of or culture do you think contributes to this to that to our crime, to our mentality as it pertains to criminals and criminality?
All of it. Culture, also known in some academic circles as nurture, is a very powerful influence on the psyche of someone and another nation. And from the birth of so-called independent Jamaica, violence and then criminality has been a part of us. From the pirates in Port Royal to the pirates of the colonial masters in the early days of Gordon House, to the pirates now occupying Gordon House, to the music that we listen to. We have normalized corruption to an amazingly detrimental level, to the point where it is now ingrained in our culture and our psyche. It's something that Jamaicans are known for. I've had to work in an environment where visitors to our island interact with me on a one-on-one basis. And when things don't go their way, they resort to, we give you a thing, you know. Right? Even though they don't know the lingo. Hey, how much will it cost? Because they realize that just like in ancient times, this is a place where things can be bought, but not everyone can be bought. So when we stamp out that mentality of corruption and fostering corruption and criminality, whether it be in form of a dead culture or the gunman music culture and so on, when we create a new social contract that changes that paradigm, then we will see a change. If the UIC forms a government in this country, when the UIC forms a government in this country, I would expect a national security minister, a justice minister, and an education minister to meet with certain fraternities, such as the entertainment fraternity, to create that new social contract, that new understanding necessary to redeem succeeding generations, to create a different mindset. We have been on this island as a people, and we call it home, but it has never been home. We have never learned to love and appreciate it. It's a place that everyone seeks to get away from because of the endemic hardship from the day that the slave ship docked on this land. And the UIC will change that to make Jamaica a place that people will love to call home, a place that brings out the best in her people. That is what I want for us. That is what I want for succeeding generations. I hope that answers enough for you, Nola.
You did, and I know you're wrapping up, but I had another question.
Go right ahead. Go right ahead, Nola.
Give me a second, it literally just slipped my mind.
Okay, no problem. But your mic is open, Patrick. You had a question?
Yes, I do have one.
Go ahead.
In Jamaica, as it stands now, should you call on the police for assistance, you're not guaranteed to get it, right? You're not guaranteed to get it, or, well, you won't get it within a timely manner, right? So as to save your life or to protect your property, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would the UIC or a UIC government be open to a liberalization of the FLA? Not in the sense that we just give out guns willy-nilly, but would the UIC look openly on allowing law-abiding citizens who meet the criteria, not because you have a money and you can buy a license, right? But you meet the criteria, right? To hold a firearm.
All right. Thank you for that, Patrick. Thank you so very much for that. And this pause was to allow a couple seconds break so I can ask Oshi to make note of this timestamp and this answer. The UIC believes in your God-given right to life. It believes in your right to own property and be secure in that ownership, and believes in your right to liberty. Having said that, we also believe that the only justifiable force is the use of force for defense of one's self. As it pertains to the current laws that restrict ownership of firearms, the UIC sees it as being counterintuitive and counterproductive. The current law presumes that the state is the only entity that has a right to defend you, because our Constitution does not guarantee us the right to self-defense. So the UIC's Constitution will assert your right to self-defense. And from there, the current law does not, I repeat, does not recognize that in defense of yourself, you may need to use an implement of some sort. Okay? The UIC will therefore make sure that the supporting legislation recognizes your right to defend yourself and have an implement of some kind to defend yourself. And therefore, the licensing of it will not be you going to the state and asking or begging to be issued a license for an implement to defend yourself, but rather the state looking at you to see that you don't have any disqualification from owning such an implement. Do you understand? So you're not going to get qualified for it. They're going to make sure you're not disqualified. So in doing so, your right to defense and owning an implement for defense will be affirmed. You see the difference?
Yes, I do see it.
Wonderful. So I hope that answer will suffice.
It was. Thank you.
Nola? All right, so
I rest for now.
All right, thank you for that, Nola. All right, so we talked a lot about policing this evening, but justice and national defense came up, and I hope persons who have listened, who will listen, will take note of that. Policing will always be a topical issue in Jamaica. The JCF has a history, a very, very long history. As a matter of fact, the policing history in Jamaica goes back as far as 307 years. Yes, policing history in Jamaica goes back as far as 307 years, which makes that about 1716 to now. The JCF claims 157 years of that history, which they are saying they started as an organization in 1868 in Jamaica. Now, what is useful to note about that time period is those were periods of significant instability and height of social deprivation, aka slavery. So, if policing in Jamaica was taking place from 1716 and the JCF that we know it got organized somewhere about 1868, that colonial brutalist history is ingrained in the organizational psyche and the organizational DNA of the Jamaica Constabulary Force. What that means is that a modern Jamaica, a new Jamaica, needs a new policing paradigm. It means that it's no longer about cracking skulls. It's no longer about the various Carl Gunn type incidents. It's not about the various Pinnacle incidents and so on. And we can go on and list the various atrocities and special operations forces that atrocities have been linked to. But national security is more than about policing. It's about an entire system. It's about the jurists, the judges, the lawyers, the court system. And the UIC plans to overhaul the court system, streamline it. If it is taking so long for cases to go to court, when a 74-year-old woman is waiting 15 years to get a case heard in court, it says a lot to the degradation of justice, because justice is indeed being denied and delayed. So the UIC has a concrete plan to overhaul justice, policing, and defense. We can't do it without your help. So, if you want to learn more about the UIC, go to uicjamaica.com. Check out our manifestos and all the other supporting documents on our website. Our membership portal is there as well. We also have a very vibrant YouTube channel and now an upcoming TikTok channel. Well, it's broadcasting, and it's UIC Liberty TV on YouTube and UIC Jamaica on TikTok. Like, support, share. So these kind of information, these educational pieces from us, gets shared with the general public. So persons can see what we will do and can do to change things in Jamaica. Of course, there's a lot of hatred and vitriol, especially from the partisan public, because we keep highlighting the deficiencies in the current government system, the partisan and tribal nature of the system, and the need to change that. So let us recognize that Jamaica needs to come first, because the parties that exist, that are colonial in birth, are aligned to the big man. The UIC is the only party that you control. When you go to the polls and you vote for an MP and a prime minister, and that MP and his friends choose a prime minister, not you. And therefore, the millions that are given to them by private entity that wishes to lobby them is what keeps them in power, not you. The UIC intends to change that. So learn about the change. Don't knock it before you learn it. Thank you guys for being with me this evening. I appreciate your very tough questions. I wonder if another security minister or a security minister aspirant will be able to give such pointed answers without flipping or flopping. I appreciate your time as young persons wishing to know more about the alternative for Jamaica's governance. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you another time. As always, one Jamaica, and of course, we're stronger together. Good night, everyone.
UIC. Freedom of people of need. Hell yeah. Freedom of people of need. Yeah, yeah. Freedom of people of want. Freedom of people of need. Yeah, yeah. Freedom of people of want. Freedom of people of need. Yeah, yeah. Freedom of people of want. Freedom of people of need. Yeah, yeah. Real man a road. Now bow wolf in a tree grand a road. Now bow down to no demon a road. UIC when you see